You are going to love these folks who I've had the opportunity to get to know pretty well over the last few weeks. What tremendous expertise and energy. So hopefully you'll learn a lot today and maybe even be entertained. As Kate said, my name is Allison Tapia. I'm a Senior Director of Performance Marketing and Digital Innovation at Dermavant. And I'll let the rest of the panel introduce themselves. We're also going to share a fun fact about each of us. My fun fact is that I love 80s and 90s pop culture. My daughter is named after George Michael's album Faith, and I really enjoyed the VMAs last night because it was like watching MTV 20 years ago, so if you didn't catch it, you should look into it.
Who's George Michael?
I'm just kidding, I'm kidding.
My name is Paul Hagopian. I am the Chief Growth Officer at Fingerpaint Group. For those that aren't familiar with Fingerpaint Group, we're a collection of about 800 employees that cover marketing and specialty services, including traditional marketing, Marcom, medical affairs, and market access. So thanks for having me today. And my fun fact, let's see, yesterday, I haven't been back on the East Coast in 10 years, thought I saw someone who was a longtime friend, went, embraced them, hugged them. I was like, thank you, I haven't seen you in a long time. And they look at me and they're like, do I know you? So, awkward, but I made a friend. So, how bad could it be?
Talk about customer experience.
Exactly.
Hi, I'm Jen Loga. Today I'm Analytics Barbie. I'm at Deep Intent and I am our VP of Measurement and Analytics. If you're not familiar with Deep Intent, we have a huge booth and a lot of signage. You literally cannot miss us.
Yes.
We're primarily a DSP, but we also do have an outcomes platform which specializes in analytics and can prove out script lift, verified patient, HCP reach, all the good stuff. So excited to be here.
Awesome.
Oh, fun fact.
Fun fact. Yeah.
This is a really good one. There is actually a pharma brand drug called Genloga. I swear to God. And I have to tell people this like very clearly, because I was like, oh, what's it for? And I'm like, okay, it treats hypertension. It doesn't cause it. And if you know me, this is kind of relevant.
Love that. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm John Lenine. I'm with Bristol Myers Squibb, working in the Omnichannel Strategy Group, leading a team, works across immunology and cardiovascular. Been in this digital pharma space now for about 20 years. A bunch of time with Digitas Health, a great experience at GSK, and now last 4.5 years with BMS. My fun fact, which was verified as a fun fact by ChatGPT, was I have 4 kids, so it's not that fun, but 2 in college and 2 in high school. We just realized we both went to Bucknell. My daughter's at Bucknell, so it is a small world.
Go Bisons, for sure.
I was going to say, maybe you need some Genloga. That's a lot.
Exactly. But yeah, excited to be on the panel and pass it on.
Hey, I'm Jason Lockowitz, Executive Director of Digital Solutions at InStep Health. We do point-of-care media, omnichannel excellence, and the digital connective tissue between. And my fun fact is that I once helped my wife build a almost life-size snack stadium out of junk food for her NASCAR new business pitch at her agency.
Oh, hell yeah.
Wow.
All right.
Awesome.
Last but not least, my name is Brian Hansen, and I lead, Senior Director, I lead our US digital strategy at Genmab. For those who don't know Genmab, we're a global biotech organization that has over 20 years of experience in antibody science and research. Over the past few years, we've evolved into an end-to-end biotech where my role is in bringing our omnichannel strategy to fruition. So I came by way of Gilead Sciences for about 8 years, where I also built their digital center of excellence for their US portfolio. But here at Genmab, we look at omnichannel and look to bring that across our entire customer experience or customer engagement model, which underpins our entire commercial organization. It's a bit of a slight different take on how omnichannel is embraced in the organization. I look forward to covering that a little bit more in the discussion. Oh, fun fact, I'm going to take a riff off of you and say that I too am a fan of 80s nostalgia, and I would say that Karate Kid still remains one of my favorite all-time movies.
Preach.
The first
Cobra
one.
Kai.
And the second one's pretty good too, though.
Season 6 is coming. The finale. All right, let's get down to business while you're really here, right? So we'll just go ahead and get started. So there's been a whole conversation today about omnichannel and on all different kinds of flavors and approaches and things like that. Would love to hear from you about how your respective organization really views omnichannel and what the specific approaches that you take when working with your teams. Brian, if you could kick this off.
Yeah, sure. I hinted a little bit at it, but when I joined GenMab was about 2 years ago, which was in our pre-commercial period. Which meant we were sort of putting a lot of the core tenets and bones of the commercial organization in place. Had the opportunity to really embed omnichannel as a cornerstone, a point of differentiation for us as an organization. So for us, omnichannel goes beyond a typical sales and marketing initiative, and it cuts across our entire commercialization organization. It impacts our market access teams, it impacts our patient services teams, to a certain extent, even our corporate comms work that we do. We're relatively new in the space, so our also opinion is that every single interaction is critical, right? Not just for the two products that we have in market, but for our own reputation as an organization. So we want to embed that customer experience across every single touch point, digital, analog, personal, you name it. As we've heard throughout the conversation, right, data plays a critical component to that. When we put a lot of the infrastructure and operations in place, that was one of the major points of sort of learnings that I've seen throughout my experience, is that placing that really at the heart of everything that we do is critical. It's not an afterthought. It's not something that we then later try to combine and consolidate, but rather it's a central sort of element to everything that we do. So operations to that, governance is critical to that. Obviously compliance plays a critical component to it too, but we don't just want to personalize, we don't just want to be relevant. For us, we also want to be iterative. We want to make sure that our customers know that they've been heard and that we've learned from every one of our interactions. And we think that's going to be a big differentiating factor for us as an organization.
Yeah, just to build on that, and I'll say the views are my own here, not my company's, of course, a disclaimer out there, but I think similarly, taking a big picture approach to omnichannel, it's not just one group, department that's going to figure out what's the best experience for that customer. It's really looking across the organization, educating teams on what is that common definition of omnichannel that we have on creating that personalized customer experience, and then really putting that training in place. So when we're working now, I think the difference between now and 5 years ago is there's more people at the table. We're having to co-create a lot more with our analytics stakeholders. I know some are in the room, having to pull them to the table with our capabilities team, IT, and the brand, and customers to make sure they're part of the solution as we're co-creating together. So really working in new new ways is helping us learn as we're doing omnichannel. I think nobody's really got it figured out totally. We're all learning as we go, but that's critical to the process, kind of building those learnings into the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I think we're all learning as we go is why we're all sitting here today, right? And to build on what both of you were saying, I think the partners that you bring to the table to help you to do this are critically important, and omnichannel needs to be woven into the way, the fabric of how the organization is operating. It's not this separate function. It's not in addition to the way you work. It's how we work, right? If we want to stay relevant. A lot of conversation in omnichannel comes around, sort of the creative development, the asset development, the messaging. Based on your experiences, and Paul, I think I'll start with you. Sure. How does your team work to create consistent messaging across all the touch points when you think about all of the different customers that you need to reach? How do you find that balance in creating something that's really going to resonate for them?
Good. As I think the sole agency guy, right, on the panel, I break it down into like 3 pieces, right? I think there's obviously consistency. Consistency is important for two reasons. I think one, being able to build kind of trust and loyalty, right? Because you want to make sure that you're seeing consistent messaging throughout all the different channels. But in addition to that, as we think about just brand identity, right? Making sure that those messages are consistent are critical as we think about the concept of it. It's ultimately to drive brand awareness and adoption, right? So put that one on the side. Then you have this whole notion of personalization, right? And no doubt so many of us partners here, emerging innovation is allowing us to be able to personalize pretty much every touch point, right? But just because you can personalize it doesn't mean you should do it, right? So I think there's a practicality to how we think about personalization, right? Sure, if we had endless money, endless resources, endless staff, endless capability to integrate all those things, I mean, by all means, go for it. But I'm also a practitioner at the end of the day, and I'm trying to sit and think about what I'm getting the most bang in my buck, right? But I think what's key as we think about personalization, at least from a creator's standpoint, we need to anchor ourselves in brand identity. So I think what's critical to any omnichannel plan is being able to sit and say, okay, do I have a firm grasp of my positioning as a brand? Do I understand the value propositions of my brand? And then from there, if you've got alignment on that and organizational alignment, right? You don't have to necessarily just make sure that the omnichannel and the marketing team believe in that. You need to make sure you cascade that down to the medcoms group, to the medical affairs group, even having the analytics folks be able to understand that, so when they're doing the metrics, they understand what we're trying to get to. But then from there, thinking about segmentation and understanding what the real kind of reasons to believe are. Then sit and take a look at your channel plan, look at your journey maps, and really think about, well, which are the ones that I want to double down on from a personalization standpoint? Let's invest in those while we still experiment, right? Like in fringe kind of applications of personalization. And then the last point, and sorry, because I know I blabber on, but this one's important. You got to venture beyond consistency and personalization and really think about agility. And Brian, you started talking about that, right? A real good omni-channel plan is not about a single touch point, but a sequence of touch points, right? And that's where consistency and personalization come into play, and that's also where analytics plays. And we'll talk about, I'm sure, analytics later on, because
that's the rub, right? Like that's the issue, is that agility factor, and pharma's known to be super agile and super fast.
Of course we do. Don't lie.
But that's the issue, right? I think that everybody's facing is like, okay, well, the execution of it and the theory of it sounds great, right? The promise of it is awesome. There are some people that are kind of dabbling in it, but I don't think anybody's truly perfected it. The agility has been a consistent problem, and this is like endemic to every organization, whether it's an agency or a brand or even ad tech, right? I mean, we're founded to try to like be fast and move forward, but we're always going to get stuck in these siloed models that maybe, and I worked at agency, I have never worked at a brand, but we're going to get, we're stuck in these kind of siloed departments that struggle to be agile, that want to kind of keep all of their data and information guarded. And without that openness and that transparency, like we're never going to be able to move forward.
For sure.
And it's never going to work. Like the tech is kind of there, right? The pipes are there, analytics is there. Now it's not perfect, but we shouldn't let that get in the way of progress. But I really think like the biggest rub here is on the agility factor and the ability to move at speed. In an effort to do what we all want to do. The answer to that, I think, needs to kind of come collectively, probably from everybody in this room, right? Like, and it really kind of comes down to our business model too. There's no real motivation.
I think, you're fighting against sometimes embracing the change management and the willingness to kind of evolve the ways of working. I think we're starting to see a theme here as we were thinking about talking about all of these different departments working together, everyone embracing this approach and getting behind it, right? Because It's not that one touch point, it's all of these pieces. It's the same way when we think about the cross-functional stakeholders, right? Everybody needs to be hitting their marks if you want the system to run.
And everybody needs to know what everybody else's marks are, right?
100%.
Like, it's an orchestration of all of that. And unless you have everybody knowing what everybody else is doing, right, you're going to fall down.
For sure.
That's
We should all hold hands.
Yeah.
Just like sing.
Yes.
Yeah.
We actually played the Omnichannel drinking game today, so we're all completely.
Drinking
kidding.
Kool-Aid for sure.
We did it. We didn't. We partied too hard last night.
But I think that weaving of the fabric that I mentioned earlier, right? That's really what it's got to come through, right?
Yeah.
The threading of the needle. So we've talked about messaging. We've talked about personalization. How do we think about tailoring the omni-channel strategies based on different needs, whether it might be, specific therapeutic areas, stages of the life cycle that the product might be in? John, if I could start with you.
Great, yeah, great question. I think every plan is different, every brand launch is different. I had the opportunity last year to launch 2 amazing products, one in immunology, one in CV, and really they were different approaches based on the audience, the insights that we had, kind of the category, especially as you mentioned the question. In the CV space, it was a new launch, setting a new category, a bit of a rare disease play for us. So really different approach to educating the market, understanding where healthcare professionals and patients are in their journey of understanding this new treatment option, and really thinking through some of the dynamics of this new category, this new option. I think the other piece there was, we're launching, it's new area. How do we get that feedback quickly from the sales force to inform some of the digital solutions? So that was really exciting over this past year to see, hey, there's a need to connect these HCPs who have training with some other HCPs so we can build digital tools to actually do that. So I think it's really starting to come full circle as far as getting that customer insight information from the sales reps who are out there in the field talking to customers, or from the MSLs who are talking to customers, and then being able to build solutions for their needs. So that's been really exciting in this past launch.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Don't kick me out. This is why they don't let me out of the basement. So because we were just talking about like expediency and agility, right? How long did that take you to make that connection, right? From when you get your updated Salesforce data into onboarding it into a digital platform, however you're deploying it, like what's that time? What's your gap time there? Is it fast? Is it as fast as you want it to be?
It takes a little bit of time. I think these insights were a bit more qualitative. So it was a bit more field, hearing certain trends, certain needs from the customers, and getting that back to home office, back to our omnichannel team, and then working through a solution. So it did take some time, but I think in pharma we're getting a little bit faster on getting those insights and having them flow through.
Yeah. I hear you on the need for speed. Like this was a business problem for us not that long ago, in the sense that, as InStep Health has, omni-channel products, we have point of care at retail pharmacy, point of care in healthcare provider offices, digital connective glue between them. We ended up having an abundance of product capabilities and offerings, to the extent that, when we went hands-on with clients and started picking tactical locations or, tactics to execute at those locations, the process started becoming more cumbersome. And so rather than doing 6 or 7 independent list matches and sort of looking at how, target list A matches back to the retail pharmacy versus the doctor's office versus hospital screens versus guest Wi-Fi networks at infusion centers or things like that, what we're sort of thinking about now is this idea of scoring the whole network at once. And it used to be a manual process done by the research department, list by list, tactic by tactic. Now it's an automated process that went, it took a process that was a half a day of work down to 15 minutes. And rather than looking at each thing distinctly and individually, now that all gets sort of pulled together into one single view, right, where you can look at how does the retail pharmacy interact with the hospital screen product, how does the Wi-Fi product at the doctor's office interact with the retail pharmacy, and seeing all those things together, right? In the case of like a vaccine, for instance, right? You know that retail pharmacy is a great place to put your vaccine messaging. Did you know that in those markets there's also 150 digital hospital screens where people are passing through and they sort of feed into those pharmacies? There's a correlation between them, drawing that sort of apparency really quickly and obviously on one sheet, sort of seeing it all together at once makes it easier to understand how the tactics connect back to each other. Similarly, right, in immunology, if I'm looking at infusion centers and I know that I can run guest network Wi-Fi marketing in those centers, what are the local provider offices that are actually referring the patients to those infusion centers so that I can get them before they end up at the point of treatment and talk to them a little bit about therapeutic options that might be relevant for them. So the point is, right, just drawing the connective tissue between a lot of disparate tactics and doing it quickly and sort of efficiently is something that's going to help us get to the bottom of the omnichannel paradigm.
I love your Need for Speed Top Gun reference. Just saying.
Thematic with the
I think what you're commenting on is so critical, and while we won't have a specific kind of question on it today, but I think it's so critically important. And it came up in one of the other panels earlier today. I apologize, I can't recall which one, because there's been so much great content, but just the ability to kind of harness the data, navigate the data. There's so much of it. How to use it, where to use it, and really being able to wrap your arms around it and build it out or spell it out or create the pipes in a way that's going to be relevant for your organization or for that particular brand that you're working on, right? Whether it's rare disease, you're working on a vaccine, whatever the case might be, the views that you need, should be tailored for that particular piece of business and stood up in a way. We're talking about like different types of audiences. There's a lot of conversation about HCP and patients or caregivers, but the role of the field is so important. The ability to kind of connect that trifecta from the rep to the doctor to the patient, and then you've got to get them to get that script, right? They have to fill it. So the role that the pharmacies are playing, your managed care, your access, your coverage is also critically important. And if you're not looking at that holistically, you're putting together plans with maybe without some pieces of the puzzles, right, that could skew your decision making. So I think it's a point, to just state again in terms of being able to get that truly holistic view if you really want to embrace an omni-channel approach.
Sure, and I'll comment again, like, in the need for speed, I have another version of that, less is more, more is less, right? The idea that what we're talking about is themes of complexity, managing a lot of different moving parts, but the intersectionality between them, the connectivity between them, right? If you're working with media partners who have a single tactic in play, you're working with somebody in a DTC program, figure out if they have an HCP offering that complements it. If you're working with somebody with an offline tactic, make sure that you understand if they do have an online complementary tactic. If you're working with somebody on a niche targeting campaign, do they have a mass product that supports a different part of the aspect of the brand marketing? Because when you have sort of a little bit more under one roof, you have the control over the frequency of the messaging, the sequence of the messaging that people are reaching, and also the measurement, right? The combined totality of it. The disparate media plan that has 25 different vendors and partners, one for each individual tactic, is always going to be harder to measure than 3 or 4 bulk partners with one particular source of truth that's a little bit more unified.
Yeah.
But we have the infrastructure and data now to be able to measure a bajillion partners, right? Like unlimited partners, unlimited channels, fine. Do I recommend that? No. From a strategy perspective, probably not. You're probably going to be wasting a lot of money. There's a lot of duplication, overlap there, which we certainly can measure from a verified patient perspective, from an HCP overlap perspective, from an NBRX perspective, application of attribution. We can do all of that. That's not hard for us to do, right? In addition to that, though, the combination of the HCP plus the patient, I think, is something super interesting. I haven't seen a ton of people like deploying it very much, which I'm kind of surprised by, being like a data nerd myself. But measuring a patient that goes to see a doctor about their condition and then goes on script, what's that script lift versus reaching somebody individually, right? We can do that too. I don't think anybody's like actually activated and deployed it. Maybe it's a speed or agility type of thing and being able to get all the right people in the room. But some of those functions are there. Like, we can do all of that. So I'm like, what's the problem?
Well, here's where I run into, right? How much is too much?
Fair.
Right? I mean, like...
Well, you could certainly simplify it down, right?
I can sit and chase 55 different factors.
Sure.
Right? And I could build super complex systems to try to outmaneuver an already complex market. But sometimes the simplest way
Totally unnecessary.
is like, okay, well, is that going to get me the last 4% when I could be able to focus on these 10 things and be able to get 90%?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That might be enough.
For
I
sure.
mean, like, we're all working multiple functions, wearing many hats. So, what's that right balance?
Right.
And I'm not saying if we couldn't, I would love to, but like I also know there's a certain amount of hours in the day, right? On top of being able to get to everything we need to get to, right? And sometimes like being able to get me through that threshold of like getting 85 to 90% is enough.
Right.
And the rest of it, I'll kind of figure it out on the fly. And I know that might not sound very omni-channel, but I think it's an art and a science.
I mean,
right?
it kind of
This
is,
what we
though.
do.
Isn't that what Omnichannel is, right?
Yeah.
It's like the art and the science, but I think that's why data has to get pulled forward. Like, and obviously I'm biased, but analytics and data is always like stapled onto the end. It's like, we're doing this thing, and okay, well, we're going to measure it this way. Cool. But if you start with, okay, well, what are we trying to do? And then maybe even starting with an overlap before you even are deploying anything. Like, okay, well, what's the overlap of an audience against CTV or OLAV or digital or out of home or social or whatever, right? You can get all of that information to inform decision making versus just being like, okay, well, now we have this plan and our KPI is CTR and that's going to get us NVRX. Well, that's where it falls down. And I think that's where the strain is from our whole ecosystem of going from a brand to an agency to an ad tech, and by the time it kind of goes through all these loops, you wind up with someone that comes to me and is like, well, we're measuring on CTR. And I'm like, there's no way your client is giving you $1 bajillion to measure CTR.
We're not.
Right? They're not. Right?
We're not.
Right? So it's like, okay, well, how does that get lost in translation to what we're all talking about and want to do, and the exciting things that we are motivated by to do? How does that get lost, and how do we fix that? Those are the broken pieces of like actually fully baking it out.
I told you this was going to be good, right? I think the debate that we're having now is actually a really appropriate segue to our next question, which is one of my favorite things to talk about, which is the ecosystem. You've got all of these channels, you've got all of these partners, you've got all of these customer segments, all of these things that we want to do. What steps do you take to prioritize additions to your ecosystem? Optimizations within your ecosystem? How do you make decisions as to when it's time to move on and maybe sunset a particular channel or sunset an existing partner from your plan? Jason, if I could start with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's comments that I've sort of made about measurability or things about sequential messaging or things like what I think is right, going back to the comment I made about, less is more is less. Let's say partner A has a point of care media tactic and reaches Gen Loga, and partner B has a digital tactic that reaches Gen Loga. Both people get credit for getting Gen Loga on script, right? So what we're trying to think about is how do we sort of reduce the number of people who are getting credit for the same sort of end action, and which one really gets the credit at the end of the day? Does the ad exposure count as the thing that was the driver, or does one person's vote count more than the other in terms of who's making that influence as a media partner? What I think about sort of like, when we fit in media plans, I've seen measurement studies, right, on our own business when we're running Wi-Fi marketing in facilities to patients, where maybe the score in a measurement study would say, gosh, not a lot of these people have seen a doctor in the last 30 days. Well, you're reaching them at the doctor's office that day. Like, I don't think they're going back in 30 days after seeing the ad exposure, right? So there's a lot of things that are sort of incongruent, and sometimes how we quantify what's working and what's not working. And going back to the idea of like resetting the table every single time we start a campaign, the conditions are a little different for everybody, and we're trying to measure things a lot of times with a very unified, one-size-fits-all approach, and having sort of a boutique look at a lot of the variables that come into it, let us really understand what the success metric is. It's not just CTR, it's not just doctor visitation 30 days after an ad exposure if you're at the doctor when you're ad exposed in the first place.
I mean, I think the less is more is less analogy really resonates with me as well, because I mean, inherently ecosystems are going to be complex, especially fully functioning, like on their feet, supporting multiple brands. They're just complex things, right? Simplicity, right? Striving for as much at GenMab, what we tried to do at the implementation and early build stage was be as pragmatic and as simple as we possibly could, right? We tried to be as broad, take as much of the requirements across as many of the commercialization functions as we could. What are we trying to accomplish? To your point, like, what are the goals? What are we setting out to do? factor and build all of that in, central to us. And what we worked really hard with was, do we have our data models in place so that when the lights turn on, when things start to make their way back to GenMab, we're able to apply it and consume it in a structured manner, right? And then redistribute that and make that available to as broad part of the organization as possible. You also mentioned a little bit about sort of like optimizing and or sunsetting kind of capabilities. I'm fortunate enough at the moment we haven't had to really sunset anything, but if I think about like, if we're gonna optimize something, again, I'll go to the sort of spine of it, the data element, hope there's gonna be something in there that's gonna tell me this is the, somewhat indicate this is the direction we should be going. These are the opportunities that may be in front of you, but it's still art, science, Paul, to your point, or, sort of human element to it. You still have to kind of like translate that a little bit to kind of say, does it apply for everybody? Or is this going to become a bespoke thing? And even if it is, that's fine. It just, you place it appropriately. But if it's intended to support the enterprise, right? Ensure early on, put that level of effort in to account for that at the onset. Right? I would counterbalance that then with, again, the technical sort of, burden that may bring, or even the operational sort of needs to keep that going once it's up. Make sure those perspectives are factored into it. And ultimately, in the end, really, is it just what we're all here for, is does it advance the customer experience in any way? So it's kind of how I would sort of think a little bit about that.
Love it. Love it. I think everything that you're saying, it's really tying everything together from where we started up at the top. I just want to be mindful of our time. We've got a couple of questions left. Jen, if I could start with you for our next question. What advice would you have for the audience in terms of best practices as it relates to measurement and analytics? How do you go about helping your clients define success? What are the primary tools and resources you look to prioritize as part of, defining omnichannel success and impact?
It's like 6 questions in one.
I know.
Okay, let's see if I can remember from the top. All right, so, the primary thing I really recommend is to, one, really understand what you're trying to do. So let's assume everybody's trying to grow NBRX and reach the right people. I think that's a pretty fair assumption, right? Okay, so if you're trying to reach the right people, or even NBRX, my recommendation is to use like a Trinity model, which is your rate, so whether it's audience quality rate or NBRX rate, against the volume, against your cost pers. If you're able to balance those 3, you're in a pretty good spot. Now, if you want to prioritize one or the other over another, there's going to be certain channels and tactics that are going to influence that, right? And this is where that art and science kind of comes into play too. There's a place for programmatic, there's a place for CTV, there's a place for a concept program, there's a place for contextual. They all have their own media and strategic value. But if you're able to kind of level set, compare apples to apples across the board with that Trinity model, you'll be able to see and easily gauge what's working, what's most effective, and what's not. Now, you do have to take the context into it, right? I wouldn't recommend comparing like an endemic health publisher against a programmatic or against a CTV buy. They're completely different channels with completely different objectives. But if you're able to compare your partners in channel A versus your partners in channel B, you can really make some easy decisions there and how effective people are, in addition to gauging the overlap in an effort to boost your efficacy. Okay, so that was question 1. What was this? Oh.
So we talked about defining success. We talked about your best practices. Any particular tools or resources you would recommend?
Oh, I mean, I'm biased, but I'm going to say Deep Intent platform. Of course. We do actually have a really good platform. And it is updated daily, so when we were talking about fast, right, so I've been at Deep Intent for like 7 or so months now, and this is kind of the reason I came over was because they were like, oh, well, we are updating our RX and our claims data daily. And I was like, what? How? How does that actually work? And they're like, no, we actually built the system. And so now when you're deploying a digital campaign or a CTV or OLV, really any digital programming, we can actually funnel that in and get real-time results. And I'm like, holy crap, that's awesome. I'm in. Sign me up. And I think that's been missing for a really long time, right? It's like that immediacy. It's always been this huge lag where it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to give you $10 million, and then I'm going to hold my breath and hope it works. And 7 months later, maybe I'll get some sort of result. And now we don't need to do that anymore. You can make decisions pretty quickly.
I think what's interesting when you give this example of like, let's see what the results are in 7 months. There are multiple touch points along the way, right? Depending on the frequency in which you're measuring those results. Right. So I think the comparison of one channel versus another channel is a challenge, but I do think in the optimization of channels within a channel, you know, I think the tricky part is always being able to look at the data from one touch point to the next touch point, or multiple touch points, and understand, is that a trend or is that an outlier, right? Am I retiring this channel too soon, right? Have I not done enough? And I think that's a really tricky part of doing it, and this is where I would kind of venture beyond the data, right? To be able to maybe even use partners in your medical affairs group, your medcoms group. You know, this is where the value of advisory boards come in, right? And being able to, you know, touch and talk to key opinion leaders or community folks to be able to get a little bit of the qualitative data that comes with all that quantitative data. So
you're talking about like qualitative as far as like what kind of like mediums they're engaging in, or
and I mean, and I think awareness of messaging and making sure that they understand the messaging in the right way, I think is an important thing. So, you know, omnichannel is not just all of us really smart digital, you know, analytical, technical, you know, brand people. I think it also involves other aspects of the commercial model that other people are working on that can help give us insights as to whether or not we're doing it. We all have partners, and those partners are your colleagues internally, your agency partners, your media partners, and I think, you know, when we think about channels and measurement, it's a village that takes that on.
Well, I think that's where we need to get into too, right? Yeah. And attribution is unique to, I would say, every brand and every marketer. It's really how you define the value of each of your tactics or channels or partners. I mean, we can certainly do like statistical correlation studies where we're able to see overlaps of multiple channels of like, okay, well, what happens when somebody is exposed on digital, OLV, and CTV versus somebody only exposed on digital versus somebody only exposed on CTV. That would help inform and answer those questions, right? And I think some of those things are certainly here and able to be solved, but that attribution thing has like been a problem for like 15 years plus, right? Even before digital was a problem. So I think that that's going to be variant too, really dependent on like how your organization values each channel and partner. Generally, I tend to just do total, and everybody gets equitable parts of that, but have certainly done studies where you can do direct correlations on influences of different channels too. But it's going to be variant by brand and disease state.
So maybe next time this is what the panel will
be on. Yes, it's a panel in its own, for sure.
In the last few minutes.
No, Paul and I might have a debate. I kind of love it.
I like it.
Absolutely. I think there's a place where you can do that over drinks after this. No more. In the last, we want to make sure we leave some time for questions. So we're going to do our last question as a lightning round. So you've got to be fast. Okay. And your lightning round challenge is your omni-channel blind spot. What's the one thing you would recommend for folks to watch out for or keep in mind as they embrace an omni-channel mindset in their organization?
Okay. All right, I think I got one. Theoretical versus practical system integration, right? And what I mean by that is I can sit with an architect and build the most beautiful, wonderful house, right? But if I don't bring the structural engineer into play, then maybe some of my design is flawed by physics, right? In the same way, you know, if I'm thinking that I'm going to be able to theoretically connect my websites and my customer service portals together, but then I can't, then that is a natural disconnect right from the beginning, right? And that affects consistency and making sure that we can build trust along the way.
Okay, you got that? Jen.
I agree with that. I mean, the silos of workload and departments themselves, like the silo departments, is certainly a challenge. But in addition to that, I think more broadly than that, it's probably the incentivization or motivation to fully do Omni. I mean, many business models in our industry just aren't actually set up to make that efficient. You know, agencies are stressed to continue on a lower cost FTE model, and they're getting that push from brands who want to save dollars. And what it's doing is it's squeezing everything down, and you're taking the value out of what you could potentially do. You're just purely looking at rates or costs or how much it costs an FTE to work on your business, right? But what you're missing is the overall value of changing and completely shifting what you're trying to do. So I think that is probably the biggest blind spot of like, does the financial model of the business actually support being able to execute on me?
Write that one down.
Yeah, I think for me, real quick, it's the analytics as well, and looking at, you know, we have a ton of engagement analytics, we have marketing mix models, but how do we connect that to the customer behaviors and really tie in voice of customer as well, which I think we need to do more voice of customer research to really connect all those together. Right now, you know, we have a lot of data to make a lot of difficult choices on where to invest, what channels, where to spend our time.
Just
but
go to our
we don't
booth.
always have the full picture of, you know, what's the customer saying about this specific, you know, program or campaign to really tie it all together.
Measure twice, cut once.
Ooh, I like that.
Write that down. Jason.
For me, it's data transparency and trust between partners, right? We have certain, you know, planning teams that we work with that provide us NPI list matches to do, and the planners themselves are not allowed to view the NPI list. If we can't have a one-to-one conversation about how the data matches up and lines up, we have other partners we work with who maybe have a gap in their data providers, you know, prescription fills around specialty pharmacies that maybe we have access to, and we'll sort of share when appropriate the right information back and forth that feels very symbiotic and helpful. So it's just sort of a tale of two cities, right? And sometimes there's very weak, you know, data trust and transparency, and other times there's very, you know, in depth, and obviously the depth of the relationship makes for a better overall omni-channel plan.
All right. Hold hands, play good in the sandbox, all the stuff you learned in kindergarten.
Right. Everything I know I learned in kindergarten.
There you go, right?
So it's a little bit of the holding hands analogy, I guess, would be the blind spot. I would say I want to go fast, right? I really want to be agile, and I kind of want to constantly be trying new things and just, you know, fail fast, right? Or succeed, right? Whatever that might be. But in an organization that's growing as fast as we are, I've had to also honestly remind myself to just take a time out, right? And zoom out. Look at all of the other partners that this involves, right? Whether it's ops, whether it's IT folks, or whether it's just our other functions, and just simplify that message as much as possible. Bring them along with me as much as I can, because I have this one opportunity to honestly embed this in the culture of the organization, and it's right now, right? And so for me, I'm just trying to be as mindful and as thoughtful of that as possible, and then we'll start clicking, right? Then it'll start taking off.
So it's like stop, collaborate, and listen, right?
Yeah. Oh, man. You're on fire.